Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University.
Namaskar. Hello friends, I am Dr. Himanshu Patel and I am working as an assistant professor in School of Computer Science of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, and I am your instructor for these modules. In today's session, we will learn about intents. What is intent? What are the various components of intents? Types of intents? What is intent resolution? And we will take few examples of intent. Finally, we will look at some standard activity and broadcast actions provided by intent class. So, after studying these modules, learner should be able to understand the structure of an intent, perform operations on intent, list the type of intents, know what is intent resolution is, and you can give example of intent. You can also list some standard activity actions and some standard broadcast actions. So, let us start our discussion with what is intent. Friends, an intent is to perform an action on the screen. It is mostly used to start activity, send broadcast receiver, start services and send messages between two activity. For example, we have one login activity in which user types his username and password, and if login is successful, then user must be login into his or her account, and that activity might show welcome and username. So, username is available from login activity and it is passed to welcome page activity where username is displayed. So, we can say intent is also used to send message between two activities. It is generally used with start activity method to invoke activity, broadcast receiver, etc. The dictionary meaning of intent is intention or purpose. So, it can be described as the intention to do some action. For example, I want to dial some number, I want to open web page, or I want to see the list of contacts available on my phone. So, intent represent some intention or purpose or intention to do action. Android intents are mainly used to start the service, launch an activity, display a web page, display a list of contacts, broadcast a message, dial a phone call, etc. So, these are the few examples of intent uses. It is something like Android. Please do that with these data. For example, dial this number, open this web page. So, these are the few uses of intent. It is basically a passive data structure holding an abstract description of an action to be performed. So, I hope you might understand what is an intent and what are their uses. Now, let us try to understand various components of intent. Intent consists of many components. So, we will understand these components one by one. We can think of an intent object as a message containing bundle of information, and this bundle is sent from one activity to another activity. So, the first component is component name, component that should handle the intent. It means the receiver. Now, it is optional. The second component of intent is action name. Action name is nothing but a string naming the action to be performed. It is predefined or it can be defined by the programmer. The third component of intent is data. Information of interest for the receiver, data passed from the caller to the called component. For example, I want to dial some number. So, I need to pass this phone number that I want to dial to the dialer. So, data passed from caller to the called component. It may be location of data, which is called Uniform Resource Identifier or URI, and type of data means it may be one of the MIME type. The full form of MIME is Multipurpose Internet Mail Extension. So, data, location as well as type of data that we want to use must be specified in intent. The next component is category. It is information of interest for the Android system. A string containing information about the kind of component that should handle the intent. For example, if I want to send text, the text can be sent as a plain text message. It can be shared or sent with WhatsApp. It can be sent by messaging app or it can be sent through email. So, category contain information about the kind of component that should handle the event. The next component is extra, which is nothing but additional information that should be delivered to the handler. It is sometimes called parameters. It is normally key value pairs that carries additional information required to accomplish the requested action. The next component is flags. It is additional information that instruct Android how to launch an activity and how to treat it after executed. So, these are the various components of intent. Now, let us try to understand types of intent. Basically, there are two types of intent. The first is called explicit intent. Now, what is explicit intent is? In case of explicit intent, the target receiver is specified through the component name. We have discussed component name in previous slide. So, target receiver is specified through the component name. Generally, it is used to launch specific activity. For example, the login activity calls welcome activity. So, in this case, we can use explicit intent. The second type of intent is called implicit intent. In case of implicit intent, the target receiver is specified by data type or name, and the system choose receiver that matches the request. As we have discussed earlier, suppose I am giving data type as a plain text and data is some text, then it can be shared by message application, it can be sent through WhatsApp application, it can be sent by email also. So, in this case, the system will choose receiver that matches the request. So, it may give you or provide you with the list of application that can be used to send these plain text data, and depending on your selection, the system will do some action. And if at least one app that matches the request is found, then that activity is started. So, these are the types of intents that we have. One is called explicit intent and another is called implicit intent. Implicit intents are very useful to reuse code and to launch external application. Now, suppose I want to dial some number from within my application, I need not to write down code for send or dialing a phone call. What I can do is I can use inbuilt phone dialer to dial that number. So, implicit intents are very useful to reuse code and to launch external application which is already there, right. Now, we have discussed two types of intent, explicit and implicit. Now, in figure you can show how an intent is used when starting an activity. When the intent object names a specific action component explicitly, the system immediately starts that component. Now, let us understand how this works. For example, activity A creates an intent with an action description and pass it to start activity. Then the Android system searches all apps from an intent filter that matches the intent, and when match is found, the system starts the matching activity, for example, activity B, by invoking onCreate method and passing it the intent, which may contain some data or information. So, this is how one activity starts another activity and pass it intent with some relevant information. Now, you pass intent in start activity which is received by receiver in onCreate method activity event method. Now, let us try to understand the difference between implicit and explicit intent. So, on screen you can see what is implicit and what is explicit intent differences are. First of all, implicit intent does not specify the component. In such a case, intent provides information on available component provided by the system that is to be invoked. In case of explicit intent, it specifies the component. In such a case, intent provides the external class to be invoke. Now, let us clear this by some example. In case of implicit intent, when you tap the share button in any app, you can see the Gmail, Bluetooth and other sharing app options. Here, user sends a request is the implicit intent request, which can be handled by Gmail, Bluetooth like app. So, sharing through various app or sharing through one of the various apps available is an example of implicit intent, because we are not known in advance which app user might want to use to share his or her data. So, here we are not explicitly provide app name through which we want to share data, but when you have a list view screen and on a tap of each item you will go to detail activity is an example of explicit intent. Here you want to map list item with different activities. So, here you need to explicitly specify which activity you want to open when user taps on particular list item. So, it is an example of explicit intent. Now, how to code these implicit intent and explicit intent? So, in third point of implicit intent, you can see that we are creating one object of type intent. Now, these intent dot action underscore view is a action. So, here we want to view page. Now, which page we want to view is specified by set data method. So, in set data we are passing some URL and convert it into URI object by using URI.parse method, and argument is the page that we want to open, but we do not know whether this page is viewed in Chrome browser or any other browser that is installed on our system. So, when you call start activity method and pass this intent, the system will decide which browser you want to open for viewing this page. So, this is an example of implicit intent coding. Now, on right hand side you can see the example of explicit intent. Here also we are creating intent object. So, while creating intent object we are using two arguments. First is context. If you do not know what to specify here, you can always write down get application context, which is higher level context, and the second argument is the class name that you want to open or call. So, activity2.class is the class name that you want to open or start the activity, and when you call start intent method, it will open that start activity page, because we are explicitly specify that we want to open activity2.class. So, this is an example of explicit intent. So, friends, I hope you understand what is intent, what are the two types of intent, when to use implicit intent, when to use explicit intent, and what are the major difference between implicit and explicit intent. Now, let us try to understand intent filter. Now, when you use an implicit intent, the Android system finds the appropriate component to start by comparing the content of the intent to the intent filter declared in the manifest file of other apps on the device. So, basically which app to open is specified by intent filter. If the intent matches an intent filter, the system starts that component and delivers it to the intent object. So, it is very important for implicit type intent, and where we specify this intent filter in our manifest file, Android manifest.xml file, we will write down our intent filter. So, it specifies when to call these app when user request depending on the data. Now, if multiple intent filters are compatible or matches, the system displays a dialog, so the user can pick which app to use. We have frequently taken this example of sending message. You can send message through messaging app, you can send it through WhatsApp, or you can send it by an email. An intent filter is an expression in the app's manifest file that specifies the type of intents that the component would like to receive. So, your app defines the intent filter. For instance, by declaring an intent filter for an activity, you make it possible for other apps to directly start your activity with certain kind of intent. Likewise, if you do not declare any intent filter for an activity, then it can be started only with explicit intent. So, if you do not specify intent filter, your activity must be started by using explicit intent only. Now, let us try to understand intent resolution. What is intent resolution? Now, when using implicit intent, given such an arbitrary intent, we need to know what to do with them. This is handled by the process of intent resolution. Intent resolution maps an intent to an activity, broadcast receiver, or service that can handle it. So, how Android system comes to know which application to search for these type of intent request? So, based on intent filter, it can search, but the process of mapping an intent to an activity, broadcast receiver, or service is called intent resolution. The intent resolution mechanism basically resolves around matching intent against all the intent filter description in the installed application packages. Now, there are three pieces of information in the intent that are used for resolution. First, the action, second, the type, and third is the category. Now, using these three information, a query is done on package manager for a component that can handle the intent. The appropriate component is determined based on the intent information supplied in the Android manifest.xml file as we have discussed earlier, and finally, particular activity is mapped with intent request. Now, what action specifies? The action, if given, must be listed by the component as one it handles. So, you must specify the action. Type is retrieved from the intent's data if not already supplied in the intent. Like an action, if a type is included in intent either explicitly or implicitly in its data, then this must be listed by the component as one it handles. For data that is not a content, URI and where no explicit type is included in the intent, instead the scheme of the intent data such as HTTP or mail to is considered. Again, like the action, if we are matching a scheme, it must be listed by the component as one it can handle. Third information is category. The category must all be listed by the activity as categories it handles. That is, if you include the category underscore launcher and category underscore alternative, then you will only resolve to components with an intent that is list both of those categories. Now, activities will vary, often need to support the category default so that they can be found by start activity. Now, how to write down these three information in intent filter, we will learn in demonstration. Now, let us take example of explicit intent. An explicit intent is one that you use to launch a specific app component such as particular activity or service in your app. To create an explicit intent, define the component name for the intent object. All other intent properties are optional. The important part or compulsory mandatory part is the component name. Rest of the things are optional. For example, if you built a service in your app named download service, designed to download a file from a web, you can start it with the following code. Remember, our service name is download service. So, here I write down or explain it in comment. So, executed in activity, so this is the context and the file URL is a string URL. This is some example, you can have any other valid URL. So, how to do this? First of all, we will create object of type intent. So, download intent is intent object and we have created instance of this download intent by using new and intent. So, here these is a context and download service dot class is the name of our service which is responsible for downloading a given file. Now, we want to download particular file from internet. So, we call set data method of intent and pass these URL of that file we want to download from internet. And then we can call start service method. Here we want, if we want to start activity, we should call start activity method, but in this case we want to open or start service. So, I write start service and argument is nothing but our intent. So, these service will start, and based on the URL provided, it downloads the file in background. So, this is example of explicit intent, where we have called already defined class download service. Now, the intent has a two argument. This constructor takes two argument. First is context. You can either specify these or get application context, and class is the name of class that or activity that you want to start. So, constructor supplies the app context and the component a class object. As such, this intent explicitly starts the download service class in the app. So, I hope you are clear with this example of explicit intent. Now, let us try to understand implicit intent through some example. An implicit intent specifies an action that can be invoke any app on the device able to perform the action. Using an implicit intent is useful when your app cannot perform the action, but other apps probably can, and you would like the user to pick which app to use. So, you do not want to write down code for that, it is already there, but you want to give choice to user which app to use for doing some action. For example, if you have content that you want the user to share with other people, create an intent with action send as an action and add extra that specifies the content to share. Now, how to do this? When you call start activity with that intent, the user can pick an app through which to share the content. Now, let us take example of coding for these. Now, suppose I want to send some text message, then what I can do is I can create one intent called send intent by creating instance of intent class, and I specify action as a intent dot action send. What does it mean? I want to send some data to receiver. Next line is to provide actual data that we want to send. So, for that here we have called put extra method. Now, this put extra method specifies two things. First is the type of data that you want to send. Here it is a text. So, we write down intent dot extra underscore text. The second argument is actual data we want to send. So, that is some string represented by text message variable. Now, we have specified action, we have provided data. The next step is to set type, so that through intent filter Android system comes to know that which app can handle these type of data. So, here we set or called set type method of intent class, and here we specify type as a text slash plain. That means we want to send plain text to the sender. There are many apps available which can handle text plain content or plain text content, and it must be specified in intent filter of those apps. So, here we have write down try catch, so that if there is some exception or error occurs, we can handle that error. So, inside try block we called start activity method and provided it with intent that we have just created. So, what will happen? System will try to search for the app that can handle this action, that supports this type of data, and if one match is found, then system will open that app. But now what will happen if the request cannot be mapped to particular app? Now in that case we will get activity not found exception. So, we have handled that in catch block, and inside catch block we want to write down code that what your app should do if no activity can handle the intent. So, if some activity is mapped, then it will be started, and if no activity is found to match the intent, then we can display message or toast on screen that we cannot find activity that can handle your request. So, this is example of implicit intent. Here we have not specified any component. Component or receiver is decided by the system depending on your action and type, right. So, this is how we can use implicit intent in our program or app. Now, Android system will automatically provide you with option for matching apps, but if you want to force an app to display chooser, then how to do that? Now, when there is a more than one app that responds to your implicit intent, the user can select which app to use and make that app the default choice for the action. So, next time it will not ask you to choose particular app. If you want to always send plain text message with messaging application, then it will show you for the first time all the apps that can handle plain text message, but if you choose or if you make it as a default, then it is a default choice for the action. The ability to select a default is helpful when performing an action for which the user probably wants to use the same app every time, such as when opening a web page, user often prefer just one web browser. Every time I do not want to choose which browser to use for opening web page. So, I can make it as a default. Now, how to write code for display chooser, that we are going to discuss. Now, if multiple apps can respond to the intent request and the user might want to use a different app each time, you should explicitly show a chooser dialog. The chooser dialog asks the user to select which app to use for the action. The user cannot select a default app for the action. If we are not using chooser, then user has a choice to make it default. But if we are explicitly showing chooser, the user cannot select default app for the action. For example, when your app performs share with the action send, user may want to share using different app depending on their current situation. So, you should always use the chooser dialog Now, how this chooser dialogues looks like is shown on mobile. So, it provides you with different app options to share your data or send your data. Now, let us try to understand code to show chooser to user. To show the chooser, create an intent using create chooser and pass it to start activity. Now, let us take example. The example in next slide display a dialog with list of apps that can respond to the intent passed to the create chooser method and uses the supplied text as the dialog title. So, how to write down actual code we will see. Now, this is a code to show chooser dialog box. As usual, we will create one intent object and here the action is send. The type is text or plain text data. We want to actually put that data. So, the type is text and actual text is hi there. So, hi there is message I want to send, its type is plain text and next before giving intent to start activity we write down chooser intent. Now, here we write down intent dot create chooser and the intent that we have just created is given to create chooser method. The second argument is title that we want to show on chooser. So, share via is the title for chooser and it displays the list of possible apps that can send plain text data. Now, we write down if condition. Here we write down send intent dot resolve activity into bracket get package not equals null. Then we write down start activity and instead of intent here we provide chooser. So, any activity the if condition is nothing but it makes sure that at least one activity should match with the request and if it is not null means if some activity found then we should display that chooser dialog box, right. So, start activity and argument as a chooser intent will show you the dialog box with title share via and list of applications that can respond to the request. But what will happen if some exception is there or some error occurs? Then we will display error message via toast message. Remember, in previous demonstration we have already used this toast. Toast is nothing but temporary notification message appears on the screen and then it disappears. So, whatever exception or error we have occurred will be displayed in a toast and then it disappears. So, this is how we can force the user to choose from the available app and remember user cannot make it as a default because we are explicitly provide choice to the user, right. So, I hope you understand how to write down code to show chooser. Now, let us try to understand some standard activity action. So, on screen you can see that these are the current standard actions that intent defines for launching activities, usually through context and start activity. The most important and by far most frequently used are action main and action edit. Now, you can see various types of action on screen. I would like to explain one or two. For example, action dial will dial a particular number. Action send can send data to the receiving app. Similarly, action search is used to search data for particular keyword. So, likewise there are some standard activity actions are available to used or defined by the intent that you can readily use. Similarly, there are some standard broadcast actions are available that you can show on the screen. Now, these are the current standard actions that intent defines for receiving broadcast, usually through register receiver or a receiver tag in manifest. So, its name itself suggests what it is meant for. For example, when power is connected, you can get this broadcast action, power connected. When your mobile shut down, you will receive broadcast action shut down. Similarly, when power is disconnected, you will receive broadcast action. You can receive broadcast action power disconnected. So, likewise these are some standard broadcast action that you can use for receiving. In this module, we have learned about the structure of an intent. What type of operation can be performed on intent? We have discussed types of intent. What is intent resolution? We have take few examples of implicit as well as explicit intent, and we have discussed some standard activity actions and standard broadcast actions. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you and happy learning.